What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and today on the channel I'd like to talk about the Omega Speedmaster Professional. But before we get started with that, I want to give a quick shout out to my friends over at Exquisite Timepieces who let me borrow this watch on loan for review. Exquisite Timepieces in Naples, Florida is an authorized dealer of over 50 brands, including Omega. They're a brick-and-mortar establishment that has been in business for over 20 years. If you're interested in checking them out, I highly encourage you to go over to exquisitetimepieces.com. And if you happen to give them a call and talk watches with them, tell Evan I said hi, let him know you heard about the channel from me. Hopefully they'll continue to loan me watches in the future. So I went over to Exquisite Timepieces yesterday, and Evan pulled me aside and said, hey, guess what? I know you've been looking for a moon watch, and I have one. And he pulled the Speedmaster Professional with Hesselite crystal out of the display case and handed it to me. Now, if you've been following my channel for, I don't know, probably at least the last month or two, I've been talking about this watch quite a bit. I have a short list of watches that I'm interested in potentially getting, and they're somewhat different watches. I like them all, so I'm not sure which one I want to pull the trigger on next. That short list includes, of course, the Omega Speedmaster Professional, the Oyster Perpetual 36mm by Rolex, and also the Tudor Black Bay 36. You probably already saw my review of the Tudor Black Bay that was sent in on loan from a viewer. But if you didn't, I reviewed that watch very recently. This, of course, is the Omega Speedmaster Professional with Hesselite crystal. It is reference 311.30.42.30.01.005. MSRP on this watch is $5,250. Some basic quick specifications about this watch: case diameter 42 millimeters, lug width 20 millimeters, an overall thickness of approximately 14.5 millimeters, and a lug-to-lug width from one end of the case to the other, coming in on my calipers at about 48 millimeters. Overall, it's a pretty good size. A little bit on the large side, I guess I should say, but I don't mind a little bit bigger of a watch when it's a chronograph, when it's a diver, potentially when it's an aviation piece. The Omega Speedmaster, obviously the history of this watch speaks for itself. I'm not going to do a big long history lesson here. Suffice to say, it's one of the few watches that is certified by NASA to be worn on manned space missions. It has a long and storied history of going to the moon. All of that stuff is cool, but honestly, that has nothing to do with my driving factor or desire to buy the watch. I'm not overly concerned with who wore it before me, or what somebody else did with it. That's never really been a big factor for me. Yeah, it's cool, it's interesting. I know a lot of people are into that. A lot of people want to feel maybe connected to the heritage and the history of their timepiece. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, for me, not a big factor. Aside from those basic measurements, the other features of this watch, we have, of course, a stainless steel case and bracelet. The crystal on the one that I prefer, this one is a Hesselite acrylic crystal. Now, the watch is 50 meters water resistant, but what I have mostly heard is that you never get this watch wet. And I wouldn't anyway. Unless the watch is a dive watch made specifically to go in the water, I don't get my watches wet anyway. The dial and the handsets do feature Superluminova in a green coloration. It looks nice. I tested it. I didn't film any video of it, so forgive me. Of course, this is a chronograph watch, and that's probably one of the main reasons why people go for it. Outboard of the dial, we have a tachometric scale, which of course would allow you to measure time over distance traveled. I will, I'm sure, never use the tachometer, but it's on there, it's historic, and of course it's just a piece of the design. Now, of course, this watch runs the Omega Caliber 1861 cam actuated chronograph movement. It's a mechanical hand wind only movement. It has a power reserve of approximately 48 hours, runs at a vibrations or beats per hour of 21,600. It's an 18 joule movement. It is based off of a Lamagna movement, I think the 1873, but forgive me if I've gotten that small detail wrong. It's not an overly impressive movement. Mechanically not, the most accurate. Omega has a tolerance or specification on the accuracy for this movement of between -1 and +11 seconds per day, but that's fine for me. I think any watch that's within 10 seconds one way or the other is certainly adequate if it's not a chronometer grade movement. The real question that I'm asking myself is, should I get this watch? There's some pros and there's some cons, and based on the time that I have had with this watch now, a little over a day, 2 days it'll be by the time I return it over to Exquisite Timepieces, or decide to go over there and purchase it for that matter. Yeah, there's some good and some bad. The first good and or bad, see, this could be a double-edged sword, is the bracelet. Very nicely made. Overall, I'm impressed with it, but I'm a little scared because I haven't sized the bracelet. I didn't peel all the plastics off or anything. And the clasp only has basically 2 positions of micro adjust. And I don't believe that Omega makes a half link for this particular bracelet. So what scares me about it is I hand over the money, I own the watch, we go to resize it, and what do you know? It doesn't feel good on the wrist. I can't get a fit that I'm happy with. That's going to be a very big disappointment. I'm not very tolerant of an uncomfortable watch. So yeah, that really scares me. That's the main detraction as to whether or not I should buy this watch, if I'm being perfectly honest. If I resized it and knew that it fit and could wear it for, 20, 30 minutes, go outside into the hot, humid weather, and then walk back into an air-conditioned climate-controlled house or room or building or whatever, and I found that, it worked, I'd probably pull the trigger. I'm really otherwise pretty happy with it. I didn't realize when I was looking at this watch in pictures, and this isn't a problem or anything, it's just something I remembered that I noticed since having it. Of course, there's 3 sub-dials or registers on the dial itself. Your active running seconds, you have the 30-minute chronograph counter and the 12-hour chronograph counter. I didn't realize that the 12-hour counter doesn't have graduations for half-hour increments. Your minute register is a 30-minute register, which is great because it makes it really easy to read. On chronographs that have a 60-minute subdial register, the graduations or the hash marks tend to be so small that I can't really read it with my eyesight. This one is perfectly legible, but after one full revolution of that subdial, we don't have a graduation on the 12-hour subdial delineating it as being to that 30-minute mark. It just kind of floats out in the middle between the 12 and the 1 hour mark. It's not a problem, again, but just something I didn't really notice from pictures. I just sort of assumed that it would have had those graduations for maybe like a small hash mark for each 30-minute mark. Kind of a surprise when I was playing around with the watch and getting to know it a little bit better, that in fact was the case. I also didn't account for the fact that this is a hand wind only movement. I mean, of course I knew that it was a hand wind only movement. I didn't account for the fact, though, that it was going to be a little bit difficult to operate or manipulate that crown. The crown sits down recessed into the body of the case a little bit, and yeah, it's not super easy to hand wind this movement. It's, not a big deal, but compared to, say, my Hamilton Khaki Field, which has a very big crown that stands off the case pretty far, very, very different experience in hand winding this movement. The feedback that you get from the movement as you're hand winding it is good. It feels solid. The ratcheting of winding up the power reserve on the movement, nothing wrong there. It's just the fact that that crown is kind of short and stubby and recessed down into the case. Yeah, it does make it a little bit cumbersome to operate. Again, not a big deal. It's just something else that I noticed in my time with this watch. In talking about the movement, of course, I also knew this as well, but it's non-hacking. This is a little bit of a negative for me. I'm somewhat obsessive about the accuracy of my watches. syncing them up with a website. In my case, I use time.is, which is, an atomic time source, I guess. It's very accurate. It's, it's what I like to do with my watches. Part of the fun for me is keeping track of how they run, both on the time grapher and on the wrist. I have thrown it on the time grapher. It does seem to be running pretty good in every position, but once you get a watch on the wrist and it's keeping time, things change, It's not sitting in a static position that whole time. The fact that this movement doesn't hack, that I can't sync it up to an accurate known time source, that might bother me a little bit as time goes on. I don't know. I mean, I have non-hacking watches and my Seiko SKX with the 7S26 movement. That you can kind of back hack by giving it some reverse pressure on the crown when you're setting the time. This one, I've seen people suggest that you can do that on the Omega as well. When it's fully wound, I can tell you that you can't, or at least not on this example. It's probably because all of the springs are so new and so powerful that putting backwards pressure on that crown does not sort of back hack the seconds hand. It just keeps running right through that. Maybe if the power reserve was real low, if you just wound it up a little bit to get it running, maybe then you could. I haven't tested that out yet. But nevertheless, I would like it to be a hacking movement. It would make me happy. Something I got to think about in the long term. How can I let go of that obsession of tracking my timekeeping? I don't know. It's part of the fun of the hobby for me. It's something that I like to do. On the specs, even on Omega's website, I believe maybe it was one of the retailers I was looking at. I'm not sure now, but regardless, in a few places I read that the specs for this watch are such that the lug width is 20 millimeters, but when I get my calipers up into the little area between the lugs where the bracelet attaches, it seems like it's closer to 19 millimeters to me. If any of you guys out there own this watch and you have swapped out straps, let me know. Do 20 millimeter straps fit perfectly, or are they a little bit too big? Some things that I really do love about this watch so far in my very short time with it: very, very handsome. The finishing on the case, it's nice. It's not overly luxurious. The shape of the case with those twisted lugs, all of it is very handsome without being, again, luxuriously overdone. It feels very utilitarian. I really do like it. The dial as well, it's very simple, it's very plain, it's very straightforward. Of course, it is a little bit busy in that the fact that, it's a chronograph. It's got multiple subdials or registers. The seconds track is, I think, in 1/6 second increments, so there's a lot of graduations on that seconds track. But still, despite that, with the flat black dial, the bright, crisp white hands, tons of contrast, it's just very simple and straightforward. It's extremely legible. I really, really like that. I think the overall presentation on this watch is outstanding. Couple that with this Hesalite crystal, which I don't think features any AR coating whatsoever. Still extremely clear and very, very easy to see the dial. Overall, extremely impressed with both the dial presentation and that Hesalite crystal. Sure, the Hesalite, you're going to risk scratching and scuffing it, but as I understand it, you can buff scratches out of it pretty easily with a little product called Polywatch. I've never personally done it myself. I have seen some videos on it being done. It seems to be very easy and straightforward to do, so I'm not overly concerned about scratching up the crystal. The last thing I'll probably say about this that I noticed is, despite the fact that it's 42 millimeters, I would say that it wears not small, but it wears very much just like my Submariner does. Despite the fact that I don't have it sized up and I can't really wear it around, if I lay it on the wrist, I get the same sense of scale that I do with the Submariner. Maybe that is an indication that the Submariner wears a little bigger than the 40 millimeters might suggest. Excuse me. Maybe it's that the Seamaster wears a little bit smaller than the size might suggest. I'm not really sure which way to look at it, but I can say that I like the way that it looks on the wrist and that it fits on the wrist. With that 48 millimeter lug-to-lug width, It doesn't even begin to challenge the outer ends of my wrist circumference, which is about 6¾ inches. But yeah, that was an interesting takeaway. I thought it was going to wear bigger. I was afraid it was going to feel bigger than my Submariner, which is sort of testing the limits of what I'm comfortable with. And it doesn't. It feels more or less just the same. Alright guys, well that's going to wrap up my overall, not review, I guess. We won't call this a review, but my first impressions of the Omega Speedmaster Professional. Overall, I really do like it. I would probably buy it tomorrow if I knew it would fit me. But that's the big thing that has me worried. There's a couple of other little nitpicks that I've mentioned that I discovered so far, but none of them are deal breakers. Yeah, that's going to wrap this video up for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, not a full review, just wanted to share my impressions based on my limited amount of time that I've had with this watch. Thank you very much for tuning in and checking out this video with me. If you'd like to help support the channel, there's always a number of ways you can do that, which can be found down in the description of every video I do. Links to all my social media. Please follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, whichever you prefer. Of course, you could always go over to Patreon and help me over there. A big thanks to the guys that have been supporting me on Patreon. I really do appreciate it. Finally, if you like anything that I've reviewed and you're thinking about purchasing it, consider clicking my Amazon affiliate link before you go over there and buy it. I get a small commission every time anyone uses that link, and yeah, I really do appreciate it. Those commissions do add up. Thanks to everyone that's been using that Amazon affiliate link. I guess this is going to wrap this one for today. I will sign off like always and say bye now.